By the end of 2015, after beating Ivey, I came back to playing NL once again. I got back in shape rather quickly, and in a couple of days I felt just as I did before. Bring me as many and as deep tables as you got. Dima has made many buy-ins last month and said that games are soft. I did not know yet. After 1,000 hours between us, it was really hard to surprise each other. We had a good grasp of opponent's strategy and a number of counter strategies for pretty much any spot. One day I found myself playing against him and another guy. We've opened few tables and started playing 3 max. Everything was fine in the beginning and then bam! He shows a hand in a line I would never expect him to have. Not only have I lost a big pot, this hand also showed that the global strategy I chose for this specific spot on the turn was certainly not good. Little by little I come to my senses, turning on my full focus mode, and then BAM! Again? A pleasant feeling starts filling my body. That rarely happens after you just lost 5 buy-ins in the beginning of the session. He did it. It was important for him to prove it to himself, and he did. After a month, he retired from poker. I think not many reporters knew, but at the time Forhaley retired from poker, he was the best 6-max NL player in the world. He knew it, I knew it, and I'm pretty sure Red Baron also knew it. But wait, what Baron are we talking about? Red Baron is one of the key players in poker history. At different times, people have always argued who is the best player in the world. Whether it's Forhaley, Storyteller, or Nikita Barikovsky, Linus or Stefan, today maybe David Jones, Tux here and Linus again. Every top player could have been considered the best in the world at some point. Let's ask high-stakes regular Avr0ra. Hello everyone, key player in poker's history is a very accurate description of OTB Red Baron. All the best players in the world learned from his plays, and the concepts that he came up with, and I remind you that there were no solvers at that time, are still relevant today. We will talk about technical aspects of his game, and we will also follow the story of his transformation from advanced amateur to the best player in the world. Oh, it's always like that with those outstanding players. For example, lately we've been checking out Moon's database. And you know, like in RPG games you have those stat points you should distribute between different talents. Like you have 25 went to showdown, 52 won at showdown, and 47 1-man soft flop. Well, those guys have like 10 points more. 30 went to showdown, 54 won at showdown, and 49 1-man soft flop. And you just don't know where does he get those extra points, what makes the difference.
Друзья,
guys, we try to create the best content for you, like 1.5 years with that we spent making this video about Red Baron, so we can congratulate both you and us. And for those who want to support us, we now have a Boosty account, where for example you can find raw unedited versions of our podcasts. For those who don't want to wait and wants to get them fresh right from the oven. So, welcome. Well, the best player in the world is a very vague concept. I mean, who is the best? The one who wins the most? Or the one who is the best in terms of technical abilities? Or the one who holds lobbies for most hours? All of those parameters as well can be estimated differently, so it's very subjective in the end. Well, in chess, for example, it's a whole different story. ELO ranking, World Chess Championships, so they have it figured out. In poker, we have none of that. So when we say that Forhaley or Red Baron are the best in the world, it's just, well, it's a combined experience of their opponents. How many players want to be in reg wars against them, how many players want to fight for lobbies with them, and so on. So yeah, pretty much for all the time in poker, the question of who is the best in the world was unclear, except probably for this one period of time. Let's get back to 2010s, where pretty much all the players and all the viewers were unanimous in opinion on who is the best in the world. I remember me and my friends watching it, being amazed at how Red Baron dominates the best high-stakes players. For me personally, Red Baron is a persona. We don't really know anything about it, which is for the best, I think, because we can focus solely on his poker career. We know that his name is Jonas Mols, and he chose his nickname OTB Red Baron in honor of a German pilot, Manfred von Richthofen. Manfred was a fighter pilot during World War I. According to various estimates, he scored more than 70 victories in combat and died in disguise a few weeks before turning 26. Manfred is still one of the best aces of his time. They called him Red Baron because the fuselage of his plane was painted bright red, and the pilot himself bore the title of a Baron. And when Jonas added OTB to his nickname, he didn't know that in poker OTB stands for on the button. He meant only the best. And he used this nickname in a game Age of Mythology, before he got interested in poker. His nickname was prophetic in some sense, but money and fame did not come to him quickly. Regulars watched his career on 2+2 forum, where he signed up in 2010 and started posting hands and sharing his thoughts. I play on Everest, but I think no one local plays there anymore. I wonder why. What do I miss? What do you think? Should I move to PokerStars and full tilt poker like everyone else? So many people can be wrong, right? I play NL10 to NL100 during the day and MTTs during the night, rebuy tournaments from 2 to 11 and freeze outs from 5 to 50. My current bankroll is 1100. In replies, people suggested he enjoy a weaker European field for a little longer, before switching to PokerStars or full tilt. And also in replies he admitted that he plays NL100 having only 1100 in the back, which is a super aggressive bankroll management he will keep for a long time. Bankroll is overrated. What can go wrong if you play with 15 buy-ins for your stake? Worst case scenario, I lose half of my bankroll after 2 sessions. It hurts when they beat you at NL200, but then I can play NL100 for 5 days and get back. Why do I need bankroll management in the first place if I don't depend on this money and can easily go down the stakes if I have to? I don't want to make 10 grands a year playing poker, I want to make either 100 grands or nothing at all. Unfortunately, the graphs from this post were not preserved, but we can see that by the autumn, he tripled the bankroll he had in July. But it wasn't always so easy for him. Today those posts look a little weird, but back in the days it was totally fine to start your poker career from the point of being an advanced amateur, especially if you come from a wealthy European country. Well, of course, CIS players skipped this period, and it's clear why when we look at his posts, because 10 grand a year for CIS players is good money. And also we should point out that even though they had the idea of bankroll management, it wasn't as strict as it is today. High number of buy-ins was required for those grinders who played many tables and who focused on the number of hands and poker room bonuses, which were very generous back in the day. Baron was never a grinder. He played a low number of tables and focused on his win rate. Throughout his whole career he probably played 4 times less hands than for Haley, let's say, even though later in his career he had those crazy Zoom marathons. In the end of 2010, Baron tries playing offline for the first time. He creates a huge post where he asked about full ring ranges, should he try playing a short stacked, what to do against limpers, and is it possible to win 50 euros per hour at 510. There is Jonas Moll's profile on Hand and Mop, with winnings of 57k. He played some tournaments in 2012 and supposedly played World Series in 2019. But offline play didn't impress him, it seems, and he never became an offline regular. In the beginning of 2011, Baron tries playing NL1K, not very successfully. On January 3rd he had 32k, and in a few days he had only half of that. Well, he didn't think of anything better than trying to play on NL10k, and all of a sudden he has 20% of his bankroll left. So he had to come back to NL200 for quite some time. Good old 2011. Yeah, it looks like those posts were made by some gambler. But at that time he still wasn't a professional player. He was a very good amateur. Yes, he makes some money, maybe through deposits, maybe because of his skill level. But anyways, at that time he was a little over 20. He probably just didn't want to admit his defeat and really wanted to establish a foothold on NL1K. Well, he ended up tilting and losing half of his bankroll, trying to get it back on NL10k and losing even more. So getting back to NL200, probably even making a deposit. Actually, there are a lot of examples like that in poker overall, a lot of examples like that in our community. Shout out to Dima Flying Smile. But it was a very interesting point of bifurcation for him. We either just keep on playing for fun and enjoy the game, or we turn into a professional player who understands that it is impossible to play successfully without a strict bankroll management. And we have to stick to a certain stake as well. We can't just climb 10 stakes up after every loss. It only leads to trouble. Fortunately, he came to this point of bifurcation with a very good starter spec. He was young, he had decent poker skills. I mean, he still played profitably on the stakes from like NL 100 to NL 400. Well, maybe he didn't make like a lot of money there, but he was successful. So he had some skills. And the most important part, he was really motivated to get to high stakes. It's a great starting point for any career. So yeah, pretty much everything was on his side. The results were not long in coming. In some time he posted a very beautiful, even by today's standards, graph, where all the lines are above zero. In the spring of 2011, Baron started visiting NL 2K and even NL 5K. You can find his April's graph on 2+2 with a very convincing red line. Well, Forhaley and Red Baron climbed the stakes pretty much at the same time. But the approaches were different. While Forhaley was grinding like mad playing tons of hands, Baron's approach was more like of Nikita Bodikovsky, who played under the name Fish 2013 by the time and focused more on the quality of play. Today we have less players who grind for the rakeback pretty much. They are still out there, like GG Poker has some really nice promotions, WPN as well. But back in the day, the promotions were amazing. VIP programs were much better. And those VIP programs allowed people to make a lot of money just by playing a lot of hands. And it was hard to tell who improved faster as a player. Yeah, both approaches worked really fine, but in today's game, regulars focus more on the quality of play. But mostly because the VIP programs are not as good, and rooms provide worse rakeback deals than before. Although I think if it wasn't for the change in rooms policies, this grinding style would have been very popular still. During that time, people talked a lot on forums about which approach is better. Is it better to grind playing 12 plus tables, making a lot of rakeback, or focus on the quality of play and the win rate, playing like 4 to 6 tables? And there is a famous post from Inner Psycho who disrespects 4-table regulars, which looks really weird and odd by today's standards, but maybe he was right at the time. Yes, you are not a pro if you consider yourself one of those thinking 4-table regulars. Don't get me wrong, it's totally fine. But it has as much to do with professional poker as playing offline tournaments quotes professionally. All in all, I think you can still argue about it even today. And you will not get an objective answer which approach is better. In September of 2011, our hero was already destroying NL 400, and in October of the same year he posted his first lifetime graph. For the first million hands he won almost 100k. We are reaching the most interesting part of Red Baron's career. I'm talking about a couple of marathons he had in Zoom 500. It started, I would say, the legendary topic on 2+2 where he posted his results. You need to understand the context here. Before, Baron used to play regular tables, where you can actually pick where to play, against whom you want to play. But in fast poker, you have no say in whom you're gonna play against. For every hand, new table of a random opponent is generated, and it makes the game more competitive. At a regular table, you can play against a rec pretty much whole day, but at fast tables, you can play like 90% of hands against regulars. Also, 500 Zoom at that time was a place where a lot of outstanding high-stakes talents were forged, and where all of them sometimes came back to hone their strategy. So you had to play most of the hands against either very young, hungry, talented players, who are basically the future of this game, or against very experienced veterans of the game, who just came here to maybe try something new. At that time you could find a game at 500 Zoom 24/7. People tried to reach Supernova Elite, the highest VIP status on PokerStars, and the room itself advertised this game a lot, so many recreational players came to play. They had this really cool ad with Usain Bolt. or probably one of the most recognizable people in the world at that time. He was a part of the set. So with all the bonuses, top players had a really high hourly win rates at 500 zoom. There wasn't even a point for many of them to try high stakes. You could have very easily reached higher expected value on NL 500 zoom than on NL 1K and higher. I mean, we don't talk about the highest stakes possible here. So because of the huge volume, players from 500 zoom were really good technically. And when they tried to gain a foothold on the highest stakes, they usually succeeded. They held the lobbies, they chased away the players from the previous era, let's say. If you want real names from post-Soviet countries, first ones that come to mind, God of HU, Polina has a really good interview with him, Invoker, and Lucky CPS, one of the main Stefan partners. Those three played, I'd say, like around 10 million hands on Zoom 500 combined. Foreigners, JSM Gale, one of the best players today, by the way, he played a lot of Zoom hands back in the day. And Zazano, he already retired, but the first name that comes to mind when you talk about Zoom is Zazano. He also made some educational videos, I don't know for which site, maybe Run It Once, maybe something else. It doesn't matter, he created some content. And the OTB Red Baron himself. As you have already guessed, the task was not easy. The goal was really ambitious. To play 100k hands in Zoom in 20 days with a win rate of at least 6 BBs per 100. It's a really decent win rate for mid-stakes bomb hunters, who play much less hands per hour in a much softer pools. So even back in the day it was at least questionable, considering that the top players were making around 4 BBs per 100 at NL 500 Zoom. When Baron was asked about which tables are better for development, Zoom or regular ones, he said there's no difference, but maybe Zoom tables are even better. In my mind I remember it as Zoom punishment, because not only you have to play a lot of hands, you also need to have a very good win rate. So you really need to dive into the game. There's something to learn for us from Baron. He wanted to play the high stakes and he had a goal of getting into shape. Well, it was a roller coaster right from the start. He lost a lot of money in the very beginning and even had to play NL2K to replenish his bankroll. Although he himself knew that the marathon was really ambitious, and when they asked him about the expected win rate, he answered, I think I can reach 6 BBs per 100 for 100k hands in 25% of cases. It depends on luck. There are some great regulars at 500 Zoom, but they are a minority. There are also many break-even grinders with Supernova Elite status, weak mid-stackers and few coaches, and around 8 of the population are fishes. After 40k hands, Baron had a win rate of 7.2 big blinds per 100. Of course, I've been very lucky, winning flips, catching many sets in 3-bet pots. On the other hand, I have no luck in 4-bet pots and often hit undersets. I feel like I'm playing at A- level, definitely can do better. Tilted a little, but not too hard, doing well with the volume, have decent samples on some weak regs, and it's going to be tough for them in the following 50k hands. If I play a little better, a 6 BBs per 100 win rate looks pretty achievable. If we take a look at Baron's graph, we can see that his red line was almost break-even, and this is how he explains it. My red line is slightly above 0 because I am a bit stationary and because all of those needs at NL 500. If you'd like to know, I rarely use overbets, don't value bet thinly enough, and play in a super standard 23-19 style. Clearly it is better to bluff in spots where you are not expected to bluff, where you have poor equity when called and where your range demolishes the villain's range, especially if his range is capped. The debate on the red line has been going on for a very long time and is unlikely to ever end. And of course, a red line depends on your style of play. But one thing we can say for sure. Players of different styles, even totally opposite styles, have reached a huge success in poker. For example, Munis's red line goes down, Stefan's red line goes up, and Oshpil's red line stays at 0. Every one of those players can be considered the best in the world at some point of their career. Every one of them played in a very tough and very expensive games. So it's a matter of taste and psychology. Some prefer attacking style of play, like Stefan, Linus, early Enlight, and some prefer defensive style of play with a lot of traps, like Munis, Oshpil, and Linus actually had a period in his career where he played with a lot of traps. It is obvious that at this level you have to develop all the parts of your game, but your character and habits leave their mark. Among the people who participate in reg wars to gain an edge, meaning that they don't just hold the lobby waiting for weak players to come, but really trying to outplay other regulars, I can highlight, well, not so many players who actually try to create something new, try to rock the game, try to put their opponents in a bad position. Well, maybe among them Stefan, Jason Gale, we talked about him today already, and American Siyama of the new players. They use underbets, overbets, min-dong bets, and some weird lines to confuse the opponents. But those players are definitely a minority. Most of the players play pretty much the same, so we have this foundation on which we put our specific exploits, let's say. But at times when a Baron played, it was totally different. Not as different as in Forhaley's time, a couple of years before, but really different. All the regulars had their own style. Even preflop ranges could have varied drastically between regulars. Like you could have folded 70% against a 3-bet and still be a very successful winning player. Tough Shark is a great example. This is the guy who played NL1K mostly and was successful folding most of the hands against the 3-bet. Or we had guys like King 10 of Clubs, one of the best players on NL400 and NL1K. He won the most on those stakes, and he folded to 3-bet around 40%. Those marathons became the place where Red Baron actually communicated with the poker community. He expressed his opinion on educational videos, for example. I only watched 3 videos and all of them were terrible. I hired a coach a year and a half ago, but it was a waste of money and time. I don't think it's always pointless to hire a coach, but it was in my case. The skill difference between coach and me was very small, if there even was any. I mostly played NL200 and he was considered a mid-stakes killer, but it probably wasn't true. By the way, he's looking for backing right now. When I feel like I've hit the ceiling, then I will probably start looking for a top coach. Not a professional coach, but a well-known high-stakes regular. I don't agree with the idea that every high-stakes regular climbed the stakes thanks to discussing hands with other players. In my opinion, most of them worked on their game on their own. Well, this is a very interesting take. To my knowledge, many top players of that era, like Red Baron or Kanu 7, worked a lot on their game alone. I remember Forhaley saying in his blog that if there was one player he can see all of the hands without showdown, he would choose Kanu 7. Because he actually worked on his game alone, and this led to some of very interesting ideas. We should also point out that most of the Baron's era, let's say, was before the solvers came out. Now when we work on our game, we have some sort of a starting point, well, maybe not 100% reliable, but even still. And the study of equilibrium really propelled the technical aspect of the game in recent years. But I remember the times when we can only rely on our logic when analyzing the hands, and we used to dispute hands with friends until some of us ran out of arguments. Nowadays a lot of spots can be checked in Solver in just a couple of seconds. But at that time analyzing hands and making conclusions was even more important than today. Maybe if it wasn't for the lack of solvers, we would have never seen this exact Red Baron with his amazing logical approach. I am pretty sure even now many players are using Baron's tactics, even though they don't even realize that he created those. This is how huge his impact was on the technical side of the game. There's a theory that Baron was the first one to lay his hands on the advanced software, and this is how he created the gap between him and others, but I don't believe that. I've played against Baron for many years, he is my unspoken coach, like for many of us, and his game is actually very human-like. There's tons of logic in it, range versus range plays, human-like traps, and his own ideas. If we compare him to Avr0ra, who was a cheater, who was banned for life in 2014 for using third-party software, well, it's like day and night. When you work with solvers, it implies that those parts of the game that was completely lacking from Baron's game. So yeah, I actually believe this theory to be incorrect. And what about the famous Great Cooler concept? This was the concept about Baron from back in the day, and I think it actually proves that this theory is incorrect. But anyways, one of the top players, maybe Jacer or maybe someone else who played a lot against Baron, noticed that Baron wins too much coolers, especially in flush versus flush spots. He too often has a better flush. Like what the hell, he always shows a better flush. How is that even possible? It made some people paranoid even. So at some point people started analyzing his hand histories. It was totally illegal back in the day. And it turned out that there's no room for paranoia. He just plays pretty much perfectly his 1 or 2 card backdoor flush draws. On the early streets, he just keeps those flush draws that dominate, and with the weak ones that he would most likely lose with, he tries to make his opponents fold or just to keep the pot small. So his whole strategy from the very beginning was aimed at being at the right side of the cooler. His first marathon ended on 24th of February 2012. It took 44 days instead of 20, and his win rate ended up being way too low, 3.87 BBs per 100. And he was actually quite positive about it. I cannot say that I am devastated by the results. In the end of the day, 3.8 BB per 100 for 100k hands without any table selection against tough opponents of 2012 is not a disaster. I also managed to make 33k, 27.1 profit, 4.8 rakeback, and 1k promo. 215 per hour, not taking into account MTTs and playing other stakes. Right after the first marathon, Baron announced the second one. 125k hands with a win rate of 5 EVBBs per 100 at least. If I make it, I go back to NL1k. If not, then I play 125k zoom hands more as a punishment. This was his plan, but it went awry. He found a nice NL5k table and got super lucky. He ended up minus 15k in all-in EV, but plus 52k in real winnings. He finished the marathon on November 30th. He played around 100k hands at Zoom and the rest on higher stakes and was very successful. His Zoom win rate was 6.4, NL2k 8.5 and NL5k 13.7. In 2013 he kept on grinding Zoom, and by the end of the year his green line at Zoom was around $120k. After an unsuccessful shot at NL5k, he aimed at playing high stakes at regular tables. He kept on posting his reports in the same topic, and in January he made the same amount of money he won playing Zoom for a year. At this time he started working with solvers. I worked a lot on my game in the last few days, studied simplified game models, tinkered with Hold'em Manager filters, created my very first game tree in CREV, realized how hard poker is and how little I know. Highly motivated. Poker software evolution was a long process. For young players it would be funny to see what we did before the solvers came out and in the first days of Cardrunner TV. Also some similarity to chess here, because for young chess players today would be probably fun to see how all the players worked on their games before the computers came out. I, for example, remember that at some point I had to calculate the discriminant to determine equity realization. My coach at the time, who was very good at math, came out with his own formulas to estimate equity realization, and you had to calculate a discriminant for those. And of course it was very far from reality. For example, according to his estimations and calculations, It wasn't profitable to defend against a 3-bet. You had to fold like 80% of hands. None of the suited connectors were profitable to defend, according to him. And when I asked him why all the top regulars make those hands profitable, he just said, they are lucky. And also, according to his estimations, it was profitable to call pretty much any two when one player open raises, another calls, and you overcall on the big blind. So you should even call like 10-3 offsuit. And actually a lot of top regulars hired this guy as a coach, including Katya 18 and others. CREV was a more powerful tool, but it wasn't clear. I mean, you could have dived too much, you could have leveled yourself pretty much, and you could have ended up in a situation where you still have no idea whether it's profitable or not. For example, a very strong theorist of our times, Booty, who is still a very strong technical player today, who really understands solvers, he spent many hours in CREV and came up with a theory. And he also kinda proved it with models that position in poker doesn't matter at all. I mean, now he would himself probably laugh at that, but at the time he proved to me and Jacer that position actually does not matter at all in poker, and this is a whole big new thing. I don't know how he came up with that, but probably he just got confused in his own models. And it was a common thing in CREV, where you had to put everything manually. It was easy to make mistakes and come up with wrong outputs. Over February and March, Baron made another 120k. He complained that he's worked too much with software and he doesn't even know if it's worth it or not. Well, now we know that it was worth it. And in April he made another 100k. This is what he said about this strategy. I try to play GTO poker more and exploitative poker less. Essentially, I just wait for some huge mistakes and then exploit the most monstrous leaks. But it's hard to play close to optimal, because I have no idea how GTO strategy looks for 100 BB stacks. So it's just safe to say that I build a solid strategy that works against an average unknown solid opponent. It's hard to find such strategies' weak spots, which makes me bet not too often, fold not too often, and play more or less balanced in the common spots. Over the summer, fighting against Forhaley and other top regulars of high stakes, he lost about 150k. But then he said that he enjoyed those games the most and that he learned from it a lot. Now we gradually immerse in the most fun part of our story, when he started crushing high stakes. He didn't just get a foothold on high stakes, he destroyed it. There's also one legendary story. When people analyzed Baron's win rates on different positions, they found out that he actually makes money on the small blind. His win rate on the small blind is positive. Let me explain the technical part of it. Small blind is a position where we put dead money into the pot. And according to the mechanics of the game, it is impossible to have a positive win rate on the small blind over a big sample. To make money on the small blind over, let's say, 100k hands, you have to be very lucky, and you also need to have a huge edge over your opponents. And you need both of those things at the same time. Without a doubt, hundreds of players tried to figure out how he manages to do that. And he actually played very good in the small blind versus big blind spots. He was far ahead of his time in understanding range versus range interactions in wide spots. He knew when you cannot c-bet wide, and he also knew how to punish those who didn't know that, so he gained in both spots. And he was really good in heads-up. He wasn't a heads-up specialist, but top heads-up players of this time, who often came to 6max to play maybe some heads-up against weaker oppositions, never aimed at Baron. And not so many people were happy to join at the table which Baron started. Invoker has said in one of his videos that he understands ranges and frequencies of Red Baron even better than he himself does. And it is funny, but it is also pretty accurate. I remember Jaser and I trying to learn a 3-bet play from Baron, trying to mimic his sizings, trying to understand his lines, and when we started playing against him at the same tables, we really knew what he's doing. Like, for example, in this spot he checks his whole range and then he always bluff catches. So this spot is not very good for bluffing. Oh yeah, the way to lose 7.2k with Queen Jack just for you guys. Well, at some point here a question has to be asked: what the hell am I doing here on the turn against OTB Red Baron in a 3-bet pot on a board that is not good for me at all, with Queen Jack donating 7.2k? Like, what the hell, man? Is there any reason to shove this hand on the turn? Well, doesn't seem like it. And on that river card you may think, oh, that was a good play actually, but I don't think this queen really helps me. The way he played, we can actually divide his range into 2 parts, one that we lose against on the turn and one that we beat, and it stays the same on the river. He either have something like king queen or a nut flush, or like ace 4, ace 5, something small, or it's a bluff. I don't think that even with aces with a club, he would give me this free pass to do whatever I want on the turn. So this queen pretty much changes nothing for me. Well, he does have some random bluffs, but in the end of the day this queen changes nothing for us. And the way I understand Baron's ranges. And I think that I know him better than his own mother. This is what I'm proud of. And yeah, I think that this queen changes nothing, or if it does change something, maybe to the magnitude of 10% max. And I was right. After that his 2+2 journal was closed, and regulars from all over the world watched his ascension. For example, in the summer of 2015 he played in the most expensive game on Stars. In a really tough battle against Kanyu7 and Phil Ivey himself, he ended up winning 367 Ks. Let me go over one of the most iconic hands from this session, one of the most popular hands of my times. I've spent hours and hours discussing this hand, watched an hour-long video of Ben Sasky analyzing this hand. So let's take a look. 300 BBs deep, Kanyu7 is a very strong regular from Great Britain. His name is Alex Miller. He's made a very popular educational series and he was one of the best of his time. And Brace Ones is Phil Ivey himself. Well, he mostly played mixed games, but sometimes he enjoyed playing No Limit against the top regulars. So, 300 BBs deep. I mean, nobody now understands how to play 300 BBs deep, how c-bet strategy should look like, and nobody of course understood it back in the day. So it is impossible to say which hands Kanu will check on this board King 9-3. I mean, I can assume that 300 BBs deep, the hands that struggle the most are pocket 10s, pocket jacks and pocket queens. So we don't really want to c-bet those, and it is reasonable to check those hands, especially against a strong opponent. So Kanu's checking range looks like this. Some draws, some mid hands like pocket jacks, pocket 10s, some 9x combos, some strong backdoors. I think the most important part here is not to overdo it with draws. You should have the right amount of gut shots and backdoors in every line, so when those draws complete, you have all those nutted hands in your range. For Baron, this spot is much easier, because the dynamics of the board works in favor of the guy in position. We can wait until the board develops in a way that we have some sort of advantage, and then figure out decent sizings and bluff candidates, and make our opponent play a guessing game. Well, where he has to guess whether we have enough bluffs in our range or not. So we can say that in this spot Kanyu is the one defending and Red Baron is the one attacking, even though he called pre-flop. But yeah, those spots with deep stacks are really tough to play out of position. So Kanu calls, a flush draw comes on the turn, and Red Baron overbets. He can even play a mediocre king like that, like King Jack, so of course for Kanu there's no way of folding this hand. He has outs for decent 2-pair combos, he can beat value here. It would be a tough decision for 9x combos. We can, I think, fold all of those 10s, jacks, queens, and then call sometimes 9x and some draws. So we continue our nutted draws, our slow plays, and some part of our 9x combos. We can choose a 9, for example, that has some decent 2-pair outs, although I don't think it really matters that much this deep, compared to like 150 BBs deep. To me, it's really interesting how often does Red Baron bluff here without equity. According to solvers, we have to play cocky here, we have to bluff sometimes with hands like, I don't know, Queen 7 with a Queen of Clubs, so that we have some bluffs on the completing runouts, and so that we can put some pressure on our opponent. But no one played like that at those times, and this is again an argument in favor of Baron not using solvers before everyone else. Because solver play implies those non-equity bluffs in different spots. Baron play was always more about logic, using some blockers and so on. And here of course it's an easy decision with open-ender, considering the river card especially. But yeah, on the turn it is a standard bluff, he folds out some draws that are stronger. He can keep on bluffing on club river, he can keep on bluffing on a blank, although I don't think it is necessary. He folds enough hands on the turn, he has a lot of fold equity, and he has very clean outs of deuce and 7. And the key point of this hand, Baron shoves a 5x pot on the river. You don't really often see 5x overbets even in today's games, and consider what Kanu felt at this time. He is playing against Ivey and the best player of this time, OTB Red Baron, and he probably realizes that he would play for like a couple of hours, and then it won't happen again to him maybe ever. Most likely those players will never play at the same table again anymore. So it's a unique spot, and we face a 5x overbet shove. The price of this decision is just immense. And how he managed to find this call, it was probably, I think, an emotional decision, and yeah, it was a very tough one. I mean, logically, it's not a very good call. Ben Salsky analyzed it very well, and he said that if we call a top pair against such a shove, he can easily shove like that all of his bottom sets. So we have to call the top part of our range, we want to at least block his sets, so we want at least 2 pairs, we have some top sets in our range. And we don't need to call a lot against such an overbet. We can fold like 90% of our range and it would be totally fine. So yeah, we call our top set, some 2-pair combos, and this is pretty much it. That would be enough. Or maybe some like super cool blocker hands. I'll try to give you an example, like from the top of my hand, 9x, like ace-9 is not good. Or let's say 9-5, 9 and a blocker to the straight. If we somehow manage to end up here with such a hand. So yeah, we can fold 90% of our range, and Kanu calls with a top pair. I don't think it's because he is a weak player. I think it's because of the pressure. Big stacks, huge game, big opportunity, you don't really want to fold. And also partly I'd say a call like that would really rock the game, make it more dynamic. This way we show that we are ready to play loose, we are ready to make those hero calls. And maybe it would make a Red Baron play wider. Or maybe he did expect this game to continue, and this way he wanted to create a certain dynamics where Red Baron would have to play more aggressively and more loosely. But as we all know, it wasn't meant to be. Kanu made this call, he lost this huge pot, and it is probably the most discussed hand of his whole career. And probably the most unfortunate bluff catch of his career. Again, in 2015, everyone was talking about this hand, everyone. By the way, if you want to, you can still watch this video from Ben Salsky on Run It Once. It is still very interesting even today. I was kinda superficial about it, but he goes into details why this call is bad. Although it's probably obvious anyway. Probably the biggest highlight of Red Baron's career was this game against Ivey. It didn't last long, but come on, it's Ivey. It's like playing against Beckham in football. It's a really huge thing. I also should mention that NL40K in 2015 was a very, very expensive game. I mean, now we have all those high-stakes games on GG Poker and so on, but back in the day, Yeah, it was a lot. It's like if today someone starts an L200k game. It was a very special thing in 2015. HighStakesDB, a website that hasn't been updated for quite some time now, has Jonas Mols as a number 29, next to Tom Dwan and Barry Sweet, as one of the most winning players of all time with a profit of 2 million. I am totally positive that Baron throughout his career has won much more. I am sure it is more than 6 mil, which is a great result for those times. When he peaked, the highest games were NL 10k, and it also happened quite rarely. So people mostly played NL 5k, sometimes NL 10k, so it's quite different from what we have today. So yeah, for his times, Red Baron's results were just amazing. Also wanted to talk about those tracking websites. Today poker rooms are fighting really hard against those, and it wasn't like that in those times. PTR and HighStakesDB worked just fine, and regulars were competing for the biggest winnings for some achievements. Everything was public, reporters were discussing winnings all the time. As you saw on the screenshot, in the beginning of the summer people were already fighting for the top spots in terms of winnings. So yeah, everything was public. Over the time, Red Baron had a reputation of a player that is very tough or probably even impossible to beat. And of course in 2015, when we were playing microstakes with my friends, we weren't able to wrap our hand around the dominance of that guy. But the way the top players like Invoker, let's say, were talking about him was a lot for us. At that time, studying Baron's game was something trivial even for microstakes players. He is probably one of the most analyzed players in the history of the game. Here are some of his graphs at those times. We should mention that he was quite lucky at the crucial points of his career. It's a deadly combination when a really good player also gets quite lucky. Besides him simply outplaying you through logic, he also gets aces against your kings, and that of course can make things even worse. Also, a very important and interesting part of Baron's career is the part when Forhaley retired from poker. Because when Forhaley stopped playing as much, Baron became the king of any lobby. And nobody wanted to play against him, and nobody gave him any action when he started tables. And a funny phrase was born at that time, the first after the Baron. What does it mean? The most popular room was Poker Stars, of course. And at Stars, when starting tables, 2 players could have sit at the table without playing. So if there are 3 players at the table, you have to start playing. If there are 2, you can just sit there waiting for weaker players to come. This is how it looked. So the first after the Baron is the guy who sits with the Baron at the table, waiting for weaker players for the game to start, basically. And when Baron was not at the tables, people were fighting like 3max, 4max reg wars just to have this opportunity to be the one sitting with Baron without playing. It was like a title of some sort. So yeah, no one wanted to play against him. It sounds funny for today's environment, but this is how it was. Many people were fighting for this title, even myself included. I played like maybe 30k hands in those reg wars. Well, I started doing it in 2016 when Baron already played much less, but the most prominent ones of those are Anton, Invoker, and some Europeans. Like Viget89, maybe someone remembers him. On 888 his nickname was Please No Mercy. Old school guys probably do remember him. Eduka, well, not Eduka Poker, but his friend. Eduka has retired from poker at about that time. His friend's nickname was LD30KM. Although we called him differently in our community, well, the one who knows knows. And his nickname on 888 was OMG I'm a GTO. Why do I keep mentioning 888 Poker? Because those were 2 key rooms, 888 and Poker Stars. So all the expensive games happened there. And the one who controlled lobbies in those rooms basically was the king. And another funny story before we wrap it up. In 2016 and 2017, Baron was still very good, but because no one wanted to play against him, he became lazy. He didn't occupy lobbies as much. He came for like 2 hours and after seeing that there's no game, no action, he left. And that was the time when all this action, all those reg wars used to start. And this one time I decided to reg war against Baron, so we play, me, him and one other guy, And after some time, Antoha, one of the top recs of those times, PMs me, why the hell do you even play against Baron? Just wait a little bit, he will leave these freaking tables and you will get your spot at the table. So don't poke the bear. He will see that there is some action, he will sniff some blood, he will get into shape, and you won't be able to chase him away. So everyone was like, just leave him be, leave him at this table, wait for a couple of hours, and then you can finally play some decent games. It's funny now how those more wise colleagues of mine tried to teach me what to do against OTB Red Baron. I remember this moment really well when everyone was like, don't poke the bear. It will only make things worse.